If you are new to the page, if you are new to my groups, I'm Laura. I'm a mom of two, a holistic nutritionist, and I am the founder of The Lavish Method, where I teach women who honestly just want to lose weight and figure out food, simple way of eating that doesn't involve giving up wine or chocolate, because those are my two favorite things, and that works in real life. So every Wednesday night, if again you're new, we hang out here 8 o'clock, we chat about something, and we have a glass of wine or a cocktail and do our thing. So cheers, guys. I am having a Tempranillo wine tonight. This is a red wine. It's super low sugar. It's like, I think, 2 grams per liter. And it's really delicious. So I brought the bottle in to show you guys because I actually thought that this one was worth sharing. So this, I think you guys can see it here. It's called a Tempranillo here. So that means it's basically a Spanish wine, which are some of my favorites. And this guy is $12.95, so it's a really good price for how delicious it is, and it's been our go-to at the LCBO for the last few weeks, so you're welcome. If you need a good red for Thanksgiving this weekend, which is super exciting, then, you know, this would be a good option. So I decided, I was thinking about what to talk about on our live tonight, and with the holiday coming up, I know that that can be super stressful for a lot of us. I know it can be, you know, any holidays are stressful, whether you're having a whole bunch of people to your house and cooking and cleaning, or whether you're traveling and the roads and traffic and all of those things. And so that got me thinking that, you know, stress is such a big issue for us, especially as women. And it's been something that's come up a lot in conversations with some of my clients, right? It's like, well, you know, my stress level has gone up, and, you know, I feel like I'm not losing, or I feel like I'm really puffy, or, you know, I'm really tired and I'm craving carbs, I'm craving food all the time. So I thought tonight we could talk a little bit about stress craving, stress eating, why it happens. Like, it's not emotional. There's a physiological reason for it. And like with everything else, if we can get to the bottom of that physiological reason, then we can figure out a way around it, right? And we can basically tackle it because it's not so insurmountable. There's a reason, right? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. If you have questions as we're going through here, if you're jumping on live, amazing, type them in the chat. I love answering questions. If you're watching this on the replay, then just type them in the comments, and I'll make sure I come back and double check that there are questions and I can answer them. So that's the scoop for what we're doing tonight. Wine break, and let's get started. So stress. Stress is a response we have in our body, right? We have developed this stress response, and the stress response exists in the same manner, you know, regardless of what the stressor is. So when we develop stress, in terms of an actual physiological response in our bodies, are the things that stressed us out were physical, right? They were things that, and this is really important to understand. You might be going, yeah, I don't care, but this is important to understand because it pertains to why we get cravings when we're stressed out and how we can actually deal with them. So we develop stress to deal with physical stressors, right? Like, we were getting chased by a bear. We were getting chased by a lion. Like, something bad was happening, right? So in our caveman days, when we evolved all of these different physiological things in our bodies, you know, that was what stress was. And so a response to stress, a response that helped us to live through stress, was a response that basically gave us the energy. This is really important. It gave us the energy to either, you know, fight to defeat the opponent, whatever was trying to kill us, or if we knew we were outmatched, to run and get the F out of there, right? So to do that, stress works in a very specific way. So Kathy says, stress, what stress? Cortisol and I are best friends, right? Yes, exactly. So what happens when you get stressed? And there's different stages of the stress response, right? So the initial stress response is basically when you have like the initial onset of the stress, and you basically have this rush of adrenaline and noradrenaline, and you know, you get this insane rush of energy. And so what happens to give you energy is that your body is liberating the glycogen stores, the energy stores that are stored, you know, within your liver, that are stored within your muscles, and they're releasing them, and they're sending the sugar that has been stored in these stores into your bloodstream so that your body can quickly utilize it for energy, right? That's really important because you need a lot of extra energy to either run away from the situation, or you need a lot of extra energy to, you know, fight and stay in the situation and actually live to see the light of the next day. And so what happens was, again, that sugar, that stored energy was liberated, sent into the bloodstream, which is great, we need it. And so insulin came in and it pulls that, that sugar, that energy from the bloodstream, and it delivers it to the working muscles, and then they can use it to run or they can use it to fight. And so it was a really efficient method, and then the stressor ends and it all ends and the hormones go away for stress and we're good, we made it, right? Nowadays, our stress is different, right? We don't necessarily have that physical stress, and if we do, that's not really the stress I'm talking about now. What I'm talking about is the mental stress. Like, we have the stress that is the emotional stress, right? We have kids and spouses and parents, and we have jobs, and we have, laptops that crash, and we have traffic that stresses us out, and we have, all of these things that work on an emotional level, but they still trigger the same stress response. So what happens is, and over time, when the stress response is constantly being triggered and never being turned off, what you get is you get this constant liberation of energy, right? Every time you get that stress response being kicked in and activated, you get this constant surge of basically the hormone cortisol over time, which liberates all of the stored energy, all of the stored sugar in your bloodstream, raising your insulin level, right? And basically storing it all as fat, because we don't need to fight and we don't need to flee. So we're not using the energy. And what happens is cortisol is notorious for this. It liberates that energy, it spikes your insulin, and then it restores it as belly fat. And then this is why we gain weight from stress. What happens then is that we're on the blood sugar roller coaster, and this is where stress eating kicks in, right? So because we have now, we've liberated these glycogen stores, we've pulled them into our blood, we've, gotten insulin to come in and pull them back out of the blood and take them to the muscles so that the muscles can use them, and we can run away from the bear, or we can stand down and fight and all of those cool things. But what happens at the end of the day is we don't need to run away from a bear, we don't need to fight, we don't need to do any of those things. So basically, now you've got fat storage instead of energy usage. We have fat storage generally around the belly. That's where cortisol is known to redistribute fat. And then what happens is your blood sugar becomes too low, because what insulin did was it went in, it took all of that sugar out of the blood, right? It delivered it and then stored it as fat. But now your body's going the same as when, you eat the wrong foods and your blood sugar gets unbalanced. You can eat all the right foods, but when you're stressed, it's a different mechanism that unbalances your blood sugar. So now you end up with the cravings to bring your blood sugar back up, right? And we know, our body knows, that the fastest way to bring blood sugar back up is something that digests quickly and easily, which is carbohydrates, right? So stress triggers those carb cravings, and it makes total sense. Like, when we look at it from that physiological perspective, of course we're craving carbohydrates, because our blood sugar is super unbalanced, because insulin is back in the picture. So even if you've really worked at balancing your macronutrients, you've gotten your blood sugar under control, your hormones are under control, all it takes is chronic stress that's just there constantly, to literally get that handle off of the insulin and off of those hormones, and to unbalance them again, and to trigger all of these cravings that weren't a thing and now are a thing, and what's worse, to sabotage fat loss. So there's a couple of different things, a couple of different tricks we can use when it comes to stress eating. Let's take a little wine break, and if you guys have any questions about that, I think it's fairly straightforward. I think it's fairly clear. But if you have questions about that, by all means type them in and I will answer them to the best of my ability. So yum. So let's talk about some tips. So we know now why we have stress eating issues, right? We know why we crave the ice cream. We know why we crave the chocolate, or whatever it is that we're craving when we're stressed out. So how do we actually stop that? How do we stop the cycle? So first of all, we can work on stress management. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, because I think that's a harder thing to get a handle on. I think managing our stress is honestly a lifelong struggle, And, you know, I'm still working on it. And, you know, there's lots of great techniques out there. Maybe we can touch on a few before we come off. But I think it's more important to triage right now and to teach you how to actually, you know, stop the craving using food and kind of hacking your body, so to speak, that way. So I do a couple of different things. The first thing is, I know that I'm craving something sweet or something like carby because my blood sugar is too low. So what I do is I try to be really smart about bringing my blood sugar back up the right way and not bringing it back up the wrong way, because I know that as soon as we bring our blood sugar back up, the craving is going to get a lot less intense, because when your blood sugar is balanced again, no longer is it a physiological craving, but then it becomes more of like an emotional craving. And most of the time you can kind of get a handle on that, and you don't necessarily have to, you know, attack an entire bag of chips or eat an entire pint of ice cream. So you can do a couple of different things. You can pick something that has some carbohydrates in it, but also is balanced with some fat and protein. So, you know, a really good tip or trick is to have an apple with some almond butter on it. So having an apple with some almond butter is a quick source of sugar, so it will digest down fairly quickly, but there's also fat and protein, which will slow that back end digestion process down, which means we're not going to spike the insulin to the same extent. We're going to have a bit of a slower digestion, where it's going to send out the sugar into our bloodstream at a little bit of a slower pace. Insulin can come in at a lower amount, take that energy away in stages instead of all at once, and we're less likely going to have all of that extra fat storage, which is really important. So you want to be really mindful about choosing something that's going to satisfy the craving. You need to get your blood sugar up a little bit, but not go overboard. And the trick is waiting it out. So you need to eat whatever it is you're craving, either in a small amount or something similar, right? And then you need to distract yourself for a little bit. So, you know, a great thing to do if it's a decent day out, you know, if it's somewhat nice, is to have a little snack and then get out of the house. Go for a walk, go shopping. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing a little retail therapy, right? To distract yourself. Like anything to get you out of the house. If you're an extrovert and you're a super chatty person, call a friend, call any friend to chat with about nothing for half an hour. What you're looking for is you're looking for an amount of time where your blood sugar is going to come back up to normal. No longer are you going to be, you know, an insane, hangry, craving-driven monster. You're actually going to become reasonable again and be able to say, yeah, you know what, I really probably don't need that. I'm not really hungry. It would be great right now, but like I don't need it. Because that's the difference when we have our cravings managed from a physiological level instead of just trying to use willpower. And I know I go on and on about this all the time, but we tend, especially with stress eating, we tend to rely really, really heavily on willpower, right? We tend to think that we need to use willpower. We need to, you know, we need to just be strong enough to resist the craving. And, you know, as I say over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, you know, you can't, willpower will never win against blood sugar and against hormones. So you have to control the blood sugar and the hormones before you can use a willpower kind of based approach. Kathy says, why do some people go the other direction rather than eating carb cravings? They just aren't hungry and don't want to eat at all. It can be a no-win situation. Either direction is bad. Absolutely, either direction is bad. And it can, so that comes down to unbalanced hormones as well. So the people who tend to not eat when, and there's lots of different theories on this. It's not like a cut and dry black and white, but it comes down to the hormones that your brain produces when you get stressed. And some people basically shut down, and so they don't have those hormones that trigger, you know, hunger and fullness in the right proportions, and then it's really, really hard. So ghrelin is your hormone that signifies hunger. And so a lot of times with people, especially if they have a lot of stress issues, if there's adrenal issues, if there's thyroid issues, you know, there's so many different things that can play into this, but you can really get unbalanced hormones in terms of hunger. And so it can really throw off those cues. So absolutely, for most people who struggle with their weight, it tends to go the other way, where we end up binging and stress eating, which is what I was talking about, and ways to control that. If it's the other way, then it's almost even harder, because if you're not feeling hungry, it can be really hard to eat. So Again, it really comes down to being mindful. So you need to know that this is happening. You need to be aware that even though you're not hungry, that's not a cue from your body that it doesn't need food per se. That's a cue from your body that, you know, you need to nourish it really well and with food that's easy to digest. Because the other thing is, so when it comes to stress, what happens is that when we're in that fight or flight scenario, right, when we're in that mode, energy is shunted to the things that are going to keep us alive right then in that moment, not the background processes that keep us alive, you can kind of like for good forever. And so one of those processes is digestion. And this is why stress is so, you know, triggering to digestive issues for people as well, right? Because especially if stress exists over time, you basically have less energy being shunted to your digestive system on a regular basis. And so you have less energy with which to run that whole, you know, life-sustaining process of converting food into usable energy. And so this can really mess with your hunger cues as well. This is one of the reasons. But it can also mess with your digestion. And so a lot of times it's really important not to try to force yourself to eat foods that might be harder to digest in this scenario that Kathy's talking about. So my go-to, the thing that I recommend most to people who are struggling with eating enough, is putting together a really good quality high-fat smoothie and sipping on that. Because with a smoothie, again, you have to do it properly. You can't be a sugar bomb of a smoothie, but if it's a good, high-quality, high-fat, good amount of protein, low sugar smoothie, what's going to happen is it's going to be blood sugar balancing, but smoothies are almost pre-digested, right? So it's less work overall for your digestive system to break down, right? It doesn't have to do the mechanical breakdown. A lot of that's already done for it. So it can be a lot easier to digest. It tends to be more palatable. If you're not hungry per se, it doesn't really feel like eating, right? Because you're drinking it. So I would suggest going that route. And then the other thing you can do if you're really having trouble with digestion and like food in general, you know, when you're really stressed out, is bringing in digestive enzymes. They can be very helpful for that as well, because instead of forcing your body to create them and secrete them and do all those things, if your digestive system isn't, you know, running at full power, digestive enzymes can be super helpful because they do the heavy lifting, so to speak, right? They're going to do the work for you. So I would suggest, you know, starting with the smoothies, seeing how that goes, and going on from there. So I was doing a workshop on Sunday, and it was a great workshop. We had a really good group of women. We talked about like resetting metabolism and kind of all of this stuff when it comes to macronutrients and food. And then we did a little salad jar workshop, which was super fun. But, you know, one of the questions that I had was, how do you know, if we're working on eating enough? Because that's one of the biggest issues women have, right? Especially if we're stress cases and whatnot. One of the biggest issues we have is not eating enough. And that's a huge hindrance to fat loss, because if you're not eating enough, your body doesn't think it's getting enough food to sustain life, and it's shutting things down, right? It's slowing down that metabolic rate because it wants you to live for as long as possible, and it thinks you're starving. So you need to make sure you're getting enough food. And so how do you manage that and at the same time listen to your body, right? Because if your cues are off, you know, your body's not necessarily telling you the right thing. So you have to really know where you're at and how, you know, in balance and in tune your body is. So if you have been, you know, balancing your macronutrients for a while and, you know, seeing great results and your energy is good and all of these things are in place, and you notice that you're really not hungry in the mornings and you tend to not get a hunger on until maybe 10 or 11, in that case I would say, and we're kind of branching off from stress, but that's okay. In that case, I would say, you know, go with it. That's totally fine. Your body's telling you it doesn't really need food. It's fine to wait a little while, have like a longer fast, and then have breakfast when you're hungry. If, on the other hand, you're struggling, if your energy's not there, if your weight is up and down, you know, if you know you're stressed out, if you know there's issues, then I would say the exact opposite. And I would say in this case, you need to know that, you know, your hormones aren't balanced and things aren't working properly. And so what we need to do is we need to go in, right? And we need to make it as simple as possible. We need to do things like use these smoothies. We need to make sure you're getting enough food, because if you're not getting enough food, you're not going to be able to hit your goals. Like straight up, if you are not getting enough food, you cannot hit your goals. And if stress is hindering that, we need to look at how we can, again, like work the system, work your body, right? And kind of succeed in spite of that. And it's really hard to do, but we can do it. So it's all about, at the end of the day, knowing what's going on, paying attention to the cues. Like that's really what stress comes down to. Paying attention to the cues, knowing what's going on, right? Understanding that the response that makes you either want to eat or not want to eat is all biology at the end of the day. It all comes down to hormones, right? It all comes down to neurotransmitters. It all comes down to science. And so if we can just go with that approach and we can balance what's going on, then it's going to be a whole heck of a lot easier to overcome the stress eating and the stress challenges. So I am not seeing any other questions come up, which is really cool. We've been on for about 25 minutes, which is a good amount of time for a Wednesday Night Live. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm just going to have another sip of wine, and then we're going to close this out. And if there's any other questions that come in, I will make sure that I do my thing. And I answer them. Sorry, I've got emails coming up across my screen, and I get distracted. Okay, so that's it, you guys. If you have questions on stress, if you have questions on stress eating, if you want to know more tips on managing it, any of those things, you can do a couple things. You can leave a comment here in the comment thread of this live, and I'll get to it. You can also sign up for my weekly live webinar. I do it Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up on my website, and we spend an hour. We dive deep. We talk a lot more about things, and you can ask any of your questions live on there as well. Kathy says, thank you. You're welcome, Kathy. I hope this was helpful. That's really it for tonight. I hope you guys have a really great Thanksgiving. If you're tuning in now or, over the next few days watching this replay, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you have a fantastic long weekend if you're here in Canada. I just think it's such a great holiday. It's such a great way to kick off the holiday season by, thinking about all of the things that we're thankful for, because it's really easy to get caught up in the things that we wish were different, to get caught up in the goals, to get caught up in all of the things happening that we want to happen. And I think too often, we forget to really give thanks for where we are and how far we've come and all of these cool things. So if you're watching this, right, if you're watching this, that means you've obviously come a long way, because you're no longer looking for quick fixes and magic pills and shakes and all the things, right? You're here right now watching this because you want to know how food works. That's why you follow me. That's all I talk about. I say it over and over again. I teach you how food works, right? How it works in your body and how you can use that, to hit whatever goals you have. So if you're here right now, that's amazing. So I think, focus this weekend. Instead of being stressed, instead of letting the stress eat you up, instead of, worrying about how clean your house is or if your turkey's going to taste amazing or what the F ever, just be thankful that you're here. You are where you are for a reason. We've got so much time to get even further and to dive deeper, which is super exciting. So ending it on a bit of a mushy note, which is kind of random for me, but I just felt like I wanted to say that right now, and I felt like I had to come out. So that's it, guys. Have a fantastic night. Cheers to you all. Happy Thanksgiving, and we will talk again real soon. Okay, bye.